I have heard it said before that hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, courage to see that they do not remain as they are. And if I'm honest this morning, I'm standing somewhere between anger and courage, somewhere between exhausted and engaged, between grief and grace, between fear and faith, disappointment and hope. And I start here because I do not want to pretend for one moment that we haven't all spent the last few weeks wrestling and weaving through an array of emotions that have left us asking, how long, O Lord? How long? And so I'm still in that space today. I'm caught somewhere between wanting to join in the collective celebrations and also join in the collective crying that is happening all over this nation. You see, all around this nation, we are collectively celebrating a day that honors fathers and fatherhood. We are taking time today, or have taken time this past week and weekend, to lift up those men who have had personal impact on our growth, our development, and our lives. For many, today is a day of joy. And so we all join in that collective celebration and say, Happy Father's Day. For those to whom it applies, and especially to my own who is watching on the live stream, we salute you. Yet, friends, as much as it is a day of celebration and collective honoring, it is also a day of collective sorrow and pain. The unfortunate reality we must confront at this time is that all around this nation, a daughter or son or family is grieving the loss of a parent. A parent is grieving the loss of a child. A community is grieving the loss of another friend, family member, or neighbor gone too soon. Losses that came about for many and varying reasons, but a particular loss that we must confront in this particular moment. And that is the reality that this Father's Day, there are people all over this nation yet again grieving the loss of loved ones due to the violence of injustice that has plagued this nation for far too long. The violence of injustice that has torn families apart from slave ships to the city streets. The violence of injustice that deems some lives worthy of second chances and others not. The violence of injustice that sees little children and somehow attaches threat to that body and justifies taking that body out. The violence of injustice that breaks into homes, kicks down doors, and robs lives that were peacefully sleeping. The violence of injustice that makes it wrong to kneel in protest during the national anthem, but makes it okay to kneel on the neck of another human being crying out for their mama and exclaiming, I can't breathe. The violence of injustice, friends, that has and continues to make being Black in America a ticket to premature death violence, that looks at any part of God's creation and declares it as anything but good. And while I am personally glad that the last few weeks have woken America up and made her realize that being Black shouldn't be an invitation to be killed, I have to admit, friends, that it has taken us far too long. Yes, it has taken us far too long to be angry, fed up, and willing to show up to fight the system of white supremacy that has deemed Black life disposable since the dawn of enslavement. It has taken too long for week-long social media campaigns that center Black life and Black voices. It has taken too long for institutions and individuals to decide that policies need to change, that practices need to be questioned, and that systems of policing have got to be torn down. It has taken too long. And while America seems to have woken up over the last few weeks, friends, the reality is Black life didn't just come into existence a few weeks ago. Racial injustice didn't just appear. White supremacy didn't suddenly begin to show its ugly face. Black people didn't just start demanding justice. No, the reality for Blacks in America is we couldn't breathe before, and we still can't breathe now. And so again, while I'm glad America has finally woken up, and while I'm glad policies are beginning to change, we have also got to admit that there's something terribly wrong when legislation has to be passed in order for it to be okay for me to live. And so before we go any further, let me just say we do not need any more stories. We do not need any more people to make it personal for us. We don't need to see any more videos to know that this is real, has been real, and that this nation is long overdue for reformation. So yes, friends, I'm resting in that space between emotions. And as a Black woman in a country that only gives me room to be strong, I have given myself permission to take my time. I'm taking my time being angry, exhausted, grieved, afraid, and disappointed. I'm taking my time because, as hard as it might be to conceptualize, my upbringing in suburbia, my 3 degrees, and my position in this predominantly white context do not exempt me from being targeted, nor do they suddenly erase my Blackness and make me an exception. Friends, I share that not because I need you to pity me. Please hear me loud and clear. I am Black and I am proud, but I share it so that you do not accept the myth of respectability and tokenize the people of color in your life by implying that we are somehow different. I share it because so many of you in this beloved community have been asking how I feel, looking for me to respond, wondering where I am. So friends, I'm here. We're here together, but I've taken my time, not because I don't think my voice matters, but friends, because this is not just a fight for those lives out there, it's a fight for mine too. Because it's not just something for me to theorize about or even preach about, but it's something that I have lived for 31 years of my life. Because this is not just something for me to help you work through, but friends, it's something that I am trying to breathe through. But rest assured, my friends, that navigating those in-between spaces means that while we try to catch our breath and while we sit with this righteous indignation, we can still see hope trying to spring forth. And the thing that grants me a renewed sense of life each day is knowing that God didn't stop hearing the cries of the oppressed centuries ago in Exodus, but God still hears us now. And because God hears us, God is still calling for each of us to respond, calling for us to see what God sees and hear what God hears, calling for each of us to go to Pharaoh, to those people, places, policies, and practices, and then demand liberation, calling for us to call out the people in our lives who say and think the wrong things, calling for us to check ourselves and not pretend we haven't been complicit, calling for us to step down from these places of privilege and use it for good, calling for us to remember God's activity in the past, and friends, to trust that God is active in the present as well. I know you probably heard the Exodus passage reading and wondered what Moses being called to liberate his own people had to say to us. And while I want to be clear that these are not moments to assert one's privilege and jump to the front, they are moments to give up power and privilege and accept that clarion call to bring about liberation. These are moments for you to consider what it might mean to see how your privilege has shielded and protected you in ways that others have not been able to experience. These are moments to consider that true liberation is going to require you to give up something too. Moses helps us see that. And so if you've spent the last few weeks wondering if you should respond and if you have a role, let me help ease your mind. The answer is yes. Silence, my friends, is no longer an option. Passive anger is no longer enough. Performative allyship, thoughts and prayers, and demanding more patience from oppressed groups are no longer acceptable. This clarion call is for you too, and if we profess Christianity and if we believe in the Jesus of Nazareth, that call is definitely for all of us. So, friends, as you pick up books to nurture and educate, I encourage you to pick up The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone and consider what it means for crucifixion to have been a first-century lynching. Consider what it means for the cross to be a site of suffering and trauma, yet also a site of healing and salvation. Consider what it means for Jesus to have died at the hands of power structures that attempted to silence his voice and his mission. Friends, consider what it means when we show our children a white Jesus and blatantly ignore the fact that Jesus was a poor brown refugee from Nazareth. Consider what it means when Cone repeatedly says in his works, any theology that is indifferent to the theme of liberation is not Christian theology, and that any talk about God that fails to make God's liberation of the oppressed its starting point is not Christian at all. So yes, friends, the clarion call is for you too. It's for all of us. And I know it's uncomfortable, and I know that this is hard to digest, but beloved friends, time is up for us doing a whole lot of nothing. It really is time to do something. And as many continue to inquire about what to do, in addition to the lists of resources and suggestions that are circulating the web, I think it's time that we take that four-letter word that we rest on so much and actually put it into practice. It's time that we actually take seriously what it means to love. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? Let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. 1 John 3 provides us with a working definition of love that reminds us silence, passive anger, performative allyship, thoughts and prayers, and the need for more time are not enough. This working definition of love tells us that the clarion call to bring about the liberation of the oppressed is one that must not contain a whole lot of talk, but that demands action. And you may be asking yourself, what does love have to do with it? That's not just a popular song, but for many, it's a real question that we have in moments like these when we aren't really sure what to do. But let me answer it for you. Love has everything to do with it, because to love someone is to see them, and to see them is to seek to understand them. And to seek to understand them is to figure out how to reach them in ways that are meaningful and transformative. I'll say that one more time. To love someone is to see them. To see them is to seek to understand them. To seek to understand them is to figure out how to reach them in ways that are meaningful and transformative for them. That is the framework. That means that whatever we do, whatever action we take to help bring about meaningful and transformative change, it needs to be for the benefit of and in support of that person, group, or cause, not to assuage our own guilt or to make us feel better or to ease our own mind. So friends, with that working definition and framework in mind, I hope that this methodology will help as well. Love calls us to listen. To be willing to listen for the voices of the oppressed, to listen as we are told the actual things we can do to help or to respond, to listen and to be willing to learn. But then love calls us to organize, to plan and develop strategically, to research what is already happening, and to figure out our individual and collective capacity to be involved, to organize around what is already taking place and not to start our own things, to organize with the thought in mind that love requires you to give up something, whether it be money, time, or resources. But then love also calls us to vow, to commit to something, to promise to do what it is that you say you are going to do, not just while it's popular, but in perpetuity. And then lastly, love calls us to embark, to commence to join the journey and the fight for racial justice, to know that the road is long and hard, but friends, that allyship fatigue is not a thing. The news of the last few weeks may be exhausting, but remember, it is a privilege to be tired and to be able to choose to move on from this. So as we figure out how to put that definition, that framework, and that methodology of love into practice, remember God's promise to Moses, that God will be with you. We don't go forth alone, we go with the covering of the Holy Spirit, and with the reminder that when we commit ourselves to the work of liberation, we stand where God stands. We go forth in the knowledge that God is on the side of the oppressed and that we cannot and we should not rest until all of God's people are free. And so the question of the day is, where do we go from here? And beloved friends, we go forth. We go forth in love, remembering to listen, to organize, to vow, and to embark. We go forth angry at the way things are, but with courage to see that they do not remain as they are. And we go forth with a commitment to do something. And we go forth promising ourselves and one another that we will not rest, that we cannot rest, until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May it be so. Amen.